This week on the Mindful Men podcast. I think this is a good leeway into archetypes, and I'm interested to explore what this is because there are different kinds of people that come into clinics. I mean, we're all unique in our own way, and we all respond to different types of modalities in a different way. Talk us through archetypes and how it plays out for the different types of men that might come into your clinic.
Have you run into the Mankind Project, Simon?
I've heard of it, but I haven't gone deep into it.
Okay. So the Mankind Project is a community of men. It's like 60 or 80,000 men worldwide now. There's a community in Australia. You know, it started in America in the 80s as just like a little weekend called the Wild Man's Weekend. And some of the classic writers of the time, like Robert Bly, the poet, and a couple of other figures, they basically saw that men were suffering from domestication syndrome. And we need to get the guys back out into the woods to connect with their wild man. And the wild man is an archetype, actually. You know, there's an archetype of a wild man who's hairy and just not contained and not domesticated. You even see it in some of the kind of tribal or village weddings still in places scattered across the globe, where you have the marriage happening and then you have the wild man archetype coming in to intrude to try to like carry the bride away. And there's this ritualization and this ceremony about how to kind of kick the wild man out or something, or maybe the wild man takes the bride or something. But the point is that archetypes, they speak to our imagination. Otherwise, Hollywood wouldn't be so popular and literature wouldn't be so popular. You know, they really capture our imagination. Why? Because they're part of our design. That's the definition of an archetype, is that these images cut across cultures, you know, the images like the wild man and the lover within. So the lover type person, that type person lives in every culture, basically. You have poet and artist types in basically every culture, sensitive types, right? And these sensitive types are very different than, for example, a warrior type, where you have a lion man or a lioness woman, where they're more oriented around boundary formations, creating boundaries and so on. But, you know, that's one of the things about psychology. Psychology can become boring, right? Because it's just talking about family and family and family and family and family. But really what speaks to the depths of the psyche is story. That's what speaks to us. That's what keeps us coming back. That's what moves civilizations, right, into crazy dramas, right? Crazy, horrible, tragic dramas, essentially. It's the stories that move us. And then what populates stories? It's archetypes. You know, so the Mankind Project, they teach a kind of a model of wholeness that is informed by Carl Jung's work, namely one of the Jungian followers who's dead now, named Robert Moore. So he has a map of the 4 archetypes that was inspired by Carl Jung. And the Mankind Project uses this map, not at high fidelity to the actual writer. In my doctoral dissertation, I wanted to go deep into Robert Moore's work and really figure out how the Mankind Project wasn't actually using the work the way that Robert Moore designed it. And that's what I actually teach in graduate school now, is the 4 archetypes. And I've already mentioned 2 of them, the lover and the warrior. And, you know, those are opposites. In this map and the model, the lover and the warrior are opposites. They do opposing things. The lover wants to connect and fuse and become symbiotic and codependent if it's out of balance, right? To just kind of merge. If it moves, merge with it, basically. And oh, that's so lovely. That's so wonderful. Let's cuddle. Simon, can we cuddle? We haven't met each other adequate. From the lover's viewpoint, we haven't really, really met each other unless we've spoken poetry together, we've cried, or we've kind of cuddled or something. You know, I'm being a little bit ridiculous, but you get the idea, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What's the other 2 archetypes?
Yeah, so I'll get there in a second.
Yep.
So let's just talk about the opposition. Like the warrior has such a profound allergy against that lover stuff. A lot of guys are that warrior archetype. Warrior archetype is very territorial. That person's going to be very clear about what their boundaries are. It has to do with how well a person manages their aggression and so on. Okay, so each one of these regions is like a developmental line. How good are we doing each? Are we out of balance? Are we kind of sliding into the lover and being too kind of mergy and codependent? depending on other people, or people just experience us like we're holding out a weapon all the time. That would be too much warrior. The other line is a little bit more complicated. The other opposites, actually, it's quite a bit more complicated, but I'll speak about them for a second. One of them is called the magician archetype, or the magus. And it is by far the most complicated archetype, as you would kind of expect when you hear magician, right? Magicians can do complicated things, right? So the magician is kind of like the cognitive line of development, like how well the brain integrates flows of information. But it's really diversified in terms of an archetypal sector in the psyche. Because when you hear a magician, right, you see somebody like a Gandalf or the prophet Nathan or something, where you have this kind of wisdom figure that's intuitive and is in touch with the secrets and stuff like that. And you even see like shaman figures that are doing like magical sorcery things and doing things like exorcisms and strange ritual practices and stuff. So it's like, it's a really diversified region, right? And most guys will be kind of trapped in just one sub-region of the magician, namely the cognitive, logical sector of the brain, as opposed to the intuitive aspects of the magician that are really interested in the secrets of the universe, right? You know, like high-level scientists are magicians, for example. And like, I love the science of embryology. And the more and more that I study the science of embryology, the more and more I'm in touch with the magic of the universe, because there's like a threshold. The more that you learn the science, that you realize how much you don't know, how much of it is a mystery. And so I would say that the magician, the long and short of it, is like the archetype of complexity. It's a complex magic of the universe. So the opposite of that is called the royal archetype. The sovereignty, the place of selfhood, when it's out of balance, that would be narcissism. A lot of social media stuff is getting generated about narcissism. And narcissism as a public discourse is never going to work from this archetypal perspective. It's never going to work. Why? Because it collapses narcissism discussion into the family. And what archetypal theory suggests is that no. There's something that is huge inside the human, okay, that yearns to be mirrored, yearns to elevate other people, yearns to bless people like a sovereign figure, like a king or queen would bless somebody, or a chieftainess in a hut, you know, where somebody comes, and this is really amazing in men's work, right? Because this drama just plays out where you suddenly realize that a guy is just yearning to be blessed, not complimented. It's very different, right? A blessing and a compliment. A blessing is something that you'd see in literature or film, because it's like a narrative. It's like a deep archetypal yearning. Whereas compliments can be cool. Like, I like your guitar, you know, or I like your logo.
You wouldn't be the first person to say that, so thank you.
Yeah, but it's different than a blessing, right? A blessing is, there's something deep about it. So like in the men's work, what we often find is that there's something that didn't get that. And when we don't receive something, you can't really give it. You can't really provide for somebody's wound, having not received that blessing. You can't give that to somebody if you haven't received it yourself, really. So, and why are these opposites? This is the last piece I'll talk about here. Why are these two opposites? Well, as you would expect, the royal has a tendency to get a bit arrogant and inflated, right? It's like, okay, well, I've established myself on the throne. And if you don't have something to hold that in balance, then it's gonna start to be guru syndrome, right? Or, you know, some of the clinicians out there that have not had supervision for 20 years, where it's like their intuition becomes fact, and that can be dangerous. It can be malpractice. The clown lives over in the magician too, to just keep things complicated, right? So the clown could look over at the royal figure that's too pompous and satirize it. And the magician wants to just deconstruct things a lot of the time, you know, not build some vision like the royal does.
It's really fascinating, and it's complex as well. And I'm thinking about a whole bunch of my clients that you were talking about. Where do they sit? Do we sit in one archetype, or do we cross over between the different ones?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is we all have all of them, is the whole idea. And then most of the time, most of us tend to be situated in one or two of the archetypes as predominance. There's some exceptions, right? Borderline personality disorder, for example, is like a spinning top throughout the archetypes, where you have a lot of like excessive mobility and chaos through all four sectors. That's why they get so many shadow projections, right? Because they know all four, they'll know the clinician's shadow, the two of them that the isn't as developed in, because they have mobility throughout the four. They'll be like, oh, I see you, right? And expose that shadow. But most people tend to kind of be situated in one or two of them.
And do you notice it more in guys or females as well? Or is it kind of just normal between both genders?
I guess from the classical gender binary and like the classical Western man, okay, Western European, Anglo, the first half of life is going to be, we could statistically put our bets on that it's going to be leaning towards the warrior and the royal in the first half of life. Second half of life, when testosterone starts to tank and the man starts understanding that he's going to die, then the lover is going to come more online. And often he'll get in touch with his grief, hopefully gets in touch with his grief. Otherwise, he might die of his grief, right? But for women, if we're thinking about the other side of the river, like the first half of life would be more leaning towards lover, more leaning towards probably magician, that intuition function and all of that. Of course, they're all together, and then the second half of life probably shifting more towards the warrior as testosterone goes up. Hence, shift in the night a lot of times past midlife for men and women. Men going towards the lover and women going towards warrior. So women are from Venus, men are from Mars. And from this certain perspective, in the first half of life, in the second half of life, men are from Venus, women are from Mars. As a really interesting framework that I find has some clinical weight to it.